Thank you, and good afternoon. My name is John Gresham. I'm manager of KUB's plant operations, and I'm here today with Mike Patterson, manager of KUB system operations, and we are here to talk to you briefly about KUB's water strategy. So, commissioners, if you'll think back a couple of years in your Century 2 discussions you've had, during the water plan you discussed, at that point there was the mention of the potential need to add an additional water treatment plant to KUB's system. That was mentioned at the time, I believe, to get that potential significant cost out on the radar as you all were working through the development of the Century 2 funding plan. So, spinning forward a little bit now, earlier this year we started to work on this initiative. We formed this water strategy team. We called this project a strategic initiative, and we got to work. So over the past several months, our water strategy team has delved into the issues related to an additional water plant. And as Dr. Miller said, quite succinctly, it didn't take long to recognize that this is a complex issue that has gotten a bit messy. And the reason for that is there are lots of alternatives. There are lots of factors to be considered. There's a little bit of risk involved here, and then there's the potential for significant cost. So all those things mixed together, it's been an interesting few months talking about this. So over the last several months we've talked and looked at various factors, and today what you're going to hear from us in our presentation is a little bit about the work that we've done to date, and that's going to be a little bit about the history of our existing plant. It's going to be a little bit of a discussion about some of the alternatives and factors to be considered, and then we're going to try to wrap up with where we think this is going. As I said, we started with the discussion. Our focus was really an additional water plant, but as the team's gotten together and we started talking about the factors, our mission's really evolved into one to reassess KUB's long-term strategy for providing high-quality, reliable water service to our community. A little bit more holistic approach, and I think you'll see what we mean there in a few moments. The team's listed there, made up, as we've said, of several VPs and managers from across very diverse parts of KUB. And that's been quite interesting because that diversity has brought new perspectives to the dialogue, and perspectives that I think are adding benefit to where we're trying to get to. So it's been a great exercise. Dr. Miller made it sound like it's been a lot of fun. But I really feel a lot of fire here, so if the bullet goes over, I'm out the door. But we've gotten to know each other very well, and I think we've made a lot of progress in a short bit of time. That being said, the heavy lifting that's been done to date has actually been done by this other team, the Water Supply Master Plan team. And that's a team that was conceived out of our engineering department. And that's Julie Childers, Vice President of Engineering, Mark Rauhoff, Manager of Engineering, several key water engineers, and then several water experts, system experts from across KUB have come together to focus on the technicalities of this initiative. That group immediately involves some consultants in this process, and they have been charged with really studying the alternates, the impacts, the risks, and the costs of adding a new treatment plant to our portfolio. The process of doing that, so they took their existing knowledge of our infrastructure and its configuration, and then they coupled that with a highly complex water hydraulic system of our system. And by utilizing those tools, they were able to study a great number of alternatives, configurations, based on various operational parameters. So they've really generated a wonderful suite of information for us to leverage to make these decisions. So they've done a spectacular job, and kudos to them. Now they're continuing to work. They've begun to look at our existing water plant, the MBW plant, in terms of risk. So they're currently building a study now of what could go wrong in that plant and what we might need to do moving forward to stitch that into the strategy. And I think you'll see what I mean in a few moments. Moving ahead, there's a picture of our water plant as it existed in 1926. At that time, it was built in 26, and at that time it was called the Williams Creek Treatment Plant because it sits at the confluence of Williams Creek and the University of Tennessee. That plant cost approximately $1 million to build back in the day. It was totally self-contained. It had a coal-fired steam turbine that produced all the energy to move and treat water. You see the tall smokestack back there in the background. That's no longer there, but that's where they sustain themselves. It's interesting doing research for this presentation. Electricity wasn't that prevalent in 1926 in Knoxville. It was available, but it wasn't that prevalent. That plant could produce just over 8 million gallons of water a day, treated water to our community, and could peak out at about 15 million gallons. Now, fast forwarding almost 90 years, which is pretty impressive, that's our water plant as it sits today. We renamed that plant the Mark B. Whitaker Treatment Plant in 1966 to honor that general manager. This present day plant is estimated value of about $150 million. We produce 35.5 million gallons of treated water per day on average. Our system peak was 52.1 million gallons a day. If you'll remember, that was the McClung warehouse fire. So that was the water used to extinguish that fire. And then we can produce upwards of 61.2 million gallons a day. Now this plant, and we want to make sure you all understand, this plant, our central plant, MBW, is critical to our strategy for water today. It's going to be critical for our strategy tomorrow, and it's going to be critical for our strategy in the future. So the things we are talking about are supplementing what's going on here. This plant, and many of you have been out to the site on tours, there's not much left in that building in terms of water treatment anymore. We've got a little bit of filtration in there, a little bit of pumping, but that pumping is moving to a new facility. We've got a low service pump station going on, so the building proper is still there and beautiful, but the plant's the campus now. And so we've done a bunch of work through the decades to keep that plant viable, reliable, regulatory compliant. Don't really want to say state of the art because we're a traditional treatment plant, but we've stayed up with the times. And those are the investments we've made over time, and you'll see here at the end the low service pump station. That's wrapping up. It'll finish up in about July of 2014, and then we're continuing to invest. We're doing some electrical upgrades on site to retain reliability there through fiscal year 15, and then we plan to add emergency generation on site in fiscal year 17. So that's kind of who we are, and at that point I'm going to hand over the presentation to Mr. Patterson to continue on.
Thank you, John. So one of the things that we know is our system continues to change, and certainly our customer expectations are changing as well and always increasing. We have never had any major issues with the Mark B. Whitaker plant and its ability to provide water to our customers. But that doesn't mean that we haven't quit improving the processes as well. We've made a lot of changes to that plant over the years, as John mentioned, to make sure that we increase our water producing capacity. But by definition, just having one water plant we think is a risk to our system. And that's one of the key components that our team has evaluated, is what we need to do about having that single resource. So our question for this team going forward was, is it a risk just to rely solely on one water treatment plant? Do we need to be looking at another water treatment plant, or what other options might be available for us to review? Before I go further, I want to talk a little bit just about all the components that go into our water system. It begins with the Tennessee River, which is our source for our water. That provides a highly reliable and clean water source for us. We take that water, pump it into the plant where it's treated. We pump it out onto the system where it goes into storage tanks where it then serves our customers. And the storage tanks also provide a lot of the peaking capacity that John mentioned for those high daily use demands and for firefighting needs. So as we looked at this process, we looked at several different factors. Right now we have the one plant, but do we need a second plant? Or are there other things that we need to consider? And as you look at that diagram of all components of the water system, we expanded our look at just a water plant into the entire water system. Are there things that we might do to improve distribution to our customers? So a new plant is one option, but there are others. And the goal of this team was to understand all of those options and come back and make a recommendation so we can make sure that we meet our community's needs for clean, reliable water. Regardless of what option we end up pursuing, there are several things that are going to impact that decision. Certainly cost is one of those. As John mentioned, the preliminary look at the cost of upgrading our water system could be extensive, upwards of $150 to $200 billion potentially. Outside dependency, we have to evaluate whether or not we feel comfortable in building a relationship with some of our neighboring utilities who have capacity to supply us water under certain situations. We heard a little bit, Mark talked about our Century 2 for wastewater and gas. There's also a Century 2 water program going on. And as we continue with that program, we're going to be reducing our system losses. And certainly, I think our customers are getting more savvy about their water consumption. They're installing water-saving appliances in their homes. So with less water loss and conservation by our customers, we may not need a plant of the same capacity as the MBW plant provides us now. And there's always regulatory requirements. Regulations drive a lot of what we do at KUB, and certainly on the water side, there's a heavy regulated business as well. And as new regulations come out, we may have to change our treatment processes, our use of chemicals. We need to be ready and incorporate those regulations into our plans so that we can meet all upcoming regulations. And certainly anything that we do, whether it be a new plant or system improvements, that will have an impact on our ongoing O&M costs, whether that's in staff to man the plants or additional chemicals and processes. So those things all need to be considered. So our timeline, we want to take the remainder of this winter and next summer to refine our strategy. And at that point, we're looking to come back to the board in the spring of 2015 with a recommendation moving forward. And with that, I'll open it up to any questions that y'all may have for John and myself.
And I know this is preliminary conversation, but it is the biggest concern that we have increased capacity or an alternative supply?
It's not increased capacity. We're seeing our per capita usage stabilize or decline because of the energy saving appliances. And in the past, we always had a lot of comfort in our additional surplus capacity to produce more water. But now, Commissioner, what we're seeing is it's really just having a comfort level that we can always provide water to the taps of our customers, whether that be through the treatment plant, our distribution system, our tanks, or whatever. So we think the answer is not just one particular thing, it's a combination of those possibly.
So redundancy is your goal?
Absolutely. Redundancy. We want to look at all system components to make sure that we have multiple ways of providing water to our customers.
And a bit of flexibility, having that off at a different location, different site would give us opportunity to be more flexible in times of duress particularly.
And when you look at the country, the United States, will you look at other utilities and see how many utilities have more than one treatment
Absolutely,
facility?
Commissioner. We've already done that. Our consultants have looked at a lot of our neighboring utilities in the Southeast to see how similar they look to KUB. We've actually sat down and had a lengthy discussion with one of our peer utilities on their decision process to build a second plant. And we have some more of those scheduled to see what others have done, how they've tackled this problem as well.
And we are a bit different, having a single plant. So I think we looked at 18 utilities, and of those 18, 14 had more than one plant.
And would you typically think that the additional plant would provide the same level of capacity as the existing plant? Is that in your mind, or is that too early to tell?
I would say in general, probably we don't need to double the capacity of MBW. I think that we're counting on MBW being there to supply some water in the future. The other plant would be probably a redundant plant with lesser capacity. And we would just have both plants in supplying our system's water.
So are we looking at for like an emergency temporary plan? If that one goes down, then we could at least get through a season or, until we get that one back up and running.
No, it'd be online. It would just be producing water.
So it would be going all the time. We wouldn't be there to just, okay.
And we've looked at scenarios from 15 million gallon a day plant to 30 million. So we've got the engineering study that was done is looking at all those factors and the impact they have on our storage, water aging, all those other factors. I think to answer the question earlier, I think our baseline load we're really looking at right now is about 20 million gallons a day would be probably the most probable at this point.
How much a factor are the surrounding areas, districts, in terms of potentially helping us in a crisis, or us having to help them?
Yeah, they could play a big part of this. So there was a study done a few years ago talking about all of our situations, and it's odd to look at. Our MBW has the capacity to provide water for our utility and all of our surrounding utilities. Well, they have utility capacity as well, and several of our neighbors have built redundancy recently, so there's potential there where they could be a significant partner with us.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you, guys.
Thank
Very
you.
interesting.
Thank you.
Commissioners, let me bring our project up here. Of course, I'm Paul Randolph, and this is Brooks Sinclair. I think Brooks been before us in the past to talk about maybe some safety or regulatory issues as she manages that work group for us. But we're here today to talk about our messy but real project, as Alice has stated this morning. The workforce strategy team, today, commissioners, KUB supports our customers' service needs with a combination of contract and in-house workforce. And we've met that need since KUB's service deliveries began in 1939, or really, I guess, in 1926, if you look back to the water system. And we did that in times of heavy growth in parts of our systems. We've done that as well when we've had changing regulatory environment, and we've done that as well now with the increase in our asset management replacement programs. So we've been successful with our current workforce strategy. So why are we talking about that today? Why is that a key project for us going forward? Well, in part, due to your foresight and your leadership, and now our new asset management programs, where we are changing the base load of work that we are producing with our different divisions. So that's where we stand today with this project and why we started this workforce initiative. So what's the scope of our work? Really is to look at areas where we most heavily rely on outside forces today, look at that mix between KUB and contract sources. See if that combination fits the model going forward, and if not, make recommendations for how we would change that. I will say that for each of our divisions, gas, water, wastewater, and electric, how we got to where we are today is different, and the decisions we made because the business needs are different. Our team is comprised of a couple of VPs, you would show us, Dennis Upton, myself, and Tracy Hayes, which is here with us today also, and of course Brooks Sinclair, and she'll follow up after a few more comments from me. We also reached out earlier this year and touched base with the rest of the KUB management staff to get a better understanding of how we got to where we are today. So we've had interviews with all VPs and managers outside of our team. And we also reached out and benchmarked some other utilities, some surrounding some of the Tennessee area, Tennessee Valley, and elsewhere. Some were multiple utilities like us, many had only one service they provided. Technical difficulty.
Not go back.
No, it looked like it flipped through a whole series, unless it just shut off.
I'll set it up on
Oh, okay.
Keep going back.
wrong button, that's all. Well, let's talk about what we have looked like in the past. I kind of modeled this slide after one you saw previously where we kind of looked at history over at the time frames here. But prior to 1980, KUB did most everything in-house. We did our own housekeeping, our grounds maintenance, paving. Alex was observing, looking at a piece of furniture back here in the back, an old piece of furniture. Well, if you needed a bookcase or a drafting table back prior to 1980, we could build it for you. We did that. You look at the light commercial construction we don't do today, but we used to do that too. We used to do the remodeling. We did everything. Everything but a few things. A few things being, we didn't do heavy plant design and construction. We just talked about MBW. We did not build that. That was built by outside forces. We didn't do large diameter pipe design and construction, although we did all the typical residential piping and services, meters. We did all that stuff in-house. I talked about the tremendous growth that we've experienced in the past. You heard it in October with the gas overview. And in the 80s and the 90s, the natural gas system expansions were quite large, if you recall. We, at some points, installed as many as 5,000 residential customers to the gas system at that time. So we supplemented the KUB workforce with contractors to meet the needs of the customers in the 80s and the 90s. And we didn't anticipate the growth would last as long as it did, but we knew it wouldn't last forever simply because it would ultimately build out our service territory. So when the economy turned down and the expansions and the growth stopped, it was easy for us to go to our contract workforce and reduce those workforce commitments. As we move along, I talked a little bit about, this being a supplement to the current workforce. Well, there's been other cases where we have completely implemented contractors and replaced our workforce. For example, utility locating, paving restoration, security, traffic control. We no longer do those functions. We don't share that responsibilities with contractors like we do with pipe installation and other programs today. More recently, here in the large-scale asset management programs, if we look back in 2004 when we responded to the changing regulatory requirements in the wastewater business, when we implemented PACE 10, we used contractors and outside forces to do all the design, construction, and management of that program. Now, since that time and to where we are today, we have replaced that management component with KUB folks. As we developed expertise and as we made some strategic hires, we've been able to take that program under and bring it in-house. Because we recognize, like you heard today, that's become a part of our baseload response going forward. PACE 10 is now being converted to Century 2 program, and that's a baseload of work now that's in our foreseeable future. The same thing has happened. Another example we might look at is you heard about the Century 2 work with the electric system. Pole replacement went from 1,300 poles per year to 2,600 poles per year. And we did that by adding additional contract resources to take care of that workload. Now, with the commitment that you've made on the long-range funding plans, the endorsement we heard today, we now recognize that we'll be able to continue that program going forward. So it's time to step back, and that's the value of this program today. It's time to step back with the commitment that you've made to those programs and reassess the decisions we've made in the past. So with the new baseload of work, does it make sense to continue with contract resources, or other factors make it desirable, for example, on the pole replacement, to bring some of that work back in-house? And we've used contractors for the electric construction and maintenance for some time. We took advantage of that even after the storm of '93. We saw we needed more flexibility with the workforce, and we need to develop relationships with contractors, and that's been a lot of benefits for that. So if we're going to go back and relook at this, what is our approach going to be? And if we do develop an approach and discover some opportunities, how do we move forward with those changes, and over what time period would we do that? So with that, I want to turn it over to Brooke and let her talk about that approach and where we might go moving forward. Brooke?
I suggested Paul did something funny to set me up, but I really didn't expect that. So, as Paul mentioned, we got here from a variety of ways and influences. We had rapid growth, we had situations where we had regulatory drivers, and we're here now, and what we're doing today works. This is really just an opportunity for us to take a look at some other ways that we can be more cost effective and get some more bang for our buck, just like all those other strategies that we've talked to you guys about in the past. So now that we have these 10-year long-range financial plans, we're able to also couple that with some long-range work plans that will go along with that, especially when we consider Century 2 and PACE 10. By far, that's where a lot of our budgets are made up. That's the bulk of our work. So if we're going to see some improvements, that's where we would really want to look at. And a lot of that is coupled with how can we make our workforce more prepared. You know, we have that base load of work. That's work that's happening all day, every day. That's pole replacement, that's wire, pipe replacement, all those things. What part of that should be contractor-based versus what part of the emergency or that variable work should be contractor-based? Because we want to be able to garner those relationships that we have with them today to be able to continue that when we do have those emergency situations. But we still need to maintain the knowledge and skills and abilities of our own folks internally. So what should that be? All in the process of looking at how can we get more cost effective, because we want to work within our internal budgets. We realize what our constraints are. We're going to stay within those budgets. This is just a way to maybe move dollars from inside the company to outside the company and see how that's going to work. So to do that, we're going to take a strategic approach. And part of this is really just looking at the financial and operational aspects of how we do work inside KUB and what's going to be more cost effective for that. We've already begun looking at the financial and operational analysis. So for us, when we looked at our initial budgets from last fiscal year, we were about 50% of our budgetary dollars. When you take out the utility costs, they're going towards outside resources. And that's a contractor or that's a consultant. But when we looked at the actual work tasks, there's quite a bit more of the work tasks themselves when you number it up that are going to those outside resources. And is that appropriate? So Paul mentioned benchmarking off of those other utilities. And that's something that we did to see where do we line up. And we found that we're pretty different than most other folks. Folks are using a lot less outside resources than we are. So we just wanted to see, okay, why is that? And we came up with some key decision factors that helped us sort of look at, this is what told us we should go outside for these other tasks. And we got that information internally. We did some benchmarking from the utilities like we mentioned. We also looked at best practices for other companies as well. We're not that different when you look at the business side of it. So what are those key decision factors? I'll show you those in just a second. But we coupled that with, we need a decision-making model. And that's not a model where it says if you get 3 points, you automatically go to a contractor. It's more of just a decision-making process. What should we consider? What are all those factors? And the rest of our strategic approach to this project will be identifying the areas or the tasks that really garner some initial evaluation. And again, PACE 10 and Century 2, since that's such a big part of our budget, that's where we'll spend the bulk of our time. Certainly, we'll look at tasks that are performed internal to KUB, but those are probably where we're going to find our most opportunities to see some cost effectiveness. And then we'll recommend any changes that we think are necessary back to senior staff. So those key decision factors that I mentioned are here, and they're pretty self-explanatory, but I did want to give just a couple of examples so you can kind of see how we're going to look at and go through this decision-making model. I'll give you an example of the relationship that we have with Pike and Davis Elliott. They're electrical contractors. They do a portion of our base work. They do a portion of our variable work, which is as things change and influences come into KUB. And then they also help us with our emergency work. Now that relationship relationship has been very beneficial for KUB because when we have a regional or a local problem, storm issue, event, whatever, they are able to pull resources from across the country, get them here within a day or two, just as our folks need to go home and sleep, and we're continuing restoration. So the variability of that has been very helpful. And when we look at cost effectiveness, they may be the same dollar to dollar from us. And we've not started this evaluation yet, but just to kind of think through, there's positives in one part, but on the other side it may be equal. So how does that really impact us? Well, the other thing we have to look at is how are we going to maintain our specialized expertise inside KUB? If we don't perform those tasks, we won't really have the ability to do that. So where does that end up? Another good example would be our call center, for instance. That's something that KUB has always housed in-house. Lots of companies send it outside. We just feel that from our customers' perspective, the care and satisfaction that they expect, it really warrants us keeping that inside regardless of the workload variability that we may see there, because it's pretty difficult to staff a call center when you may not be able to anticipate what your workload is going to be on a daily basis. So as we tick down through those, we'll just look at the different benefits and constraints and how those will impact us going forward, and including cost and the operational impacts of that as factors. And from doing this strategic approach and doing this analysis, we think that we're going to see several benefits. We really have not had the opportunity to sit back and look at the direct and indirect costs of what we're doing today in our current strategy. We know it works. We know it works well. We're able to maintain our metrics that we report out to the board on a pretty frequent basis. We're able to do all of those things, but we want to ensure that we are being cost effective when you consider that of our fiscal year budget for last year, as an example, we track our Century 2 and PACE 10 dollars very closely. On the capital side, our budget was about $131 million. $100 million of that went to contractors and consultants, so those outside forces, we would call them. And when we looked at how much work was actually performed of that, 90% of the work goes to contractors. So all those replacements and installations all being performed by those outside forces. Another benefit that we think we'll see from this is just being able to assess our successes and extrapolate that out to areas that we think we can make some improvements on, and learn from things we've done in the past as well as other utilities have done. And all that is looking at how can we retain those skills. It's not necessary that we retain all the skills internal to KUB. There may be very good opportunities and readily available in the outside, but we really just want to take some time to look at what that should be to make sure that when our subject matter experts are retiring, we have the ability to replace them one way or the other. And the last benefit, we think we're going to see some appropriate level of oversight. To use contractors and consultants, KUB has to have oversight with them. We have to have resources to procure, to bid, to manage, to inspect, quality control, all those things come along with that work. So when we talk about those direct and indirect costs, those will all be figured in. And we think that we'll have an opportunity to look at what is the appropriate level of that. How much oversight should we have to have in order to make sure that the contractor, the consultant, completes the work that also meets our standards and specs as well as our customers' expectations when they're in the field. So to just sort of wrap it up, we're here for lots of different reasons. We've had lots of different influences that got us to this point. Paul mentioned several of those. You've seen great growth, less growth. We've seen regulatory drivers up and down. And we have been able to respond and work well to those drivers by using and leveraging our inside resources as well as those that are outside of KUB. So this is not a situation where we're anticipating any changes to rates based upon this project. Really for us, it's just possibly maybe increasing some KUB staff to offset the outside contractors and consultants that are performing that work. So it'll work within our own budgets that we already have existing today. But the next steps for us will be to finalize that decision-making model. We'll be using those key decision factors. We will consider not only the financial, but also the operational impacts of that. And for us, we're about 25, 6 departments inside KUB, and there's always a ripple effect. So we want to make sure that as we're making these decisions and doing this analysis, that we consider all of the impacts. And that's what we mean by the peripheral effects. Then we'll identify and prioritize those areas that we think are potential potential for change. Certainly looking at primarily the Pace 10 and Century 2 work, since that's where the bulk of those dollars are going to be, and the bulk of the contractors and consultants are used. And then we'll do our analysis. And the last step will be to create those final recommendations for what we think that mix should be, and then we'll have some timelines in place, and then the cost impacts of what it would take to maybe move things in-house or out, depending upon what that specific work task would be. And with that, I'll take questions.
When do you see being in position to make a recommendation?
We have started our preliminary reviews and our preliminary financial reviews. We've identified about 8 to 12 areas that we want to look at in this first initial evaluation. A lot of those have some interlocking opportunities there, so it'll be several months, I think, before we're able to really come back and do some.
We have talked about, as Brooke has said, there's a couple of the opportunities, 6 or 8 of those. Our team would work very closely with that, and as we've developed the model, part of that will be a rollout for the rest of the organization. So we would pass this on to our counterparts, the VPs and the directors, where they could take that model and then implement it themselves, so it becomes systemic to KUB's organization. That's the.
Do you have any, where you have an outside contractor and our folks that do the same task, are you gonna be able to compare the cost and the reliability and the effectiveness? Well, you're gonna, all that's gonna, is there some places that you can actually look at those?
Yes, especially on our electrical side, we've already in the past have done some of that review, and we find that we're pretty close. But again, there are strategic situations on, for instance, the electric side, where we really need those contractors to maintain and do some of that base load work so that we can get the resources that we need when we have emergency situations. And I think we're going to find several situations where we can do that. We do construction. We just may not do construction on the larger pipe situations. That's going to take quite a lot of expertise, equipment. So those are not really the areas we're looking at. We're not looking at plant expansions. We're not looking at 36-inch water mains. We're looking more on the 2-inch, 4-inch, 6-inch, lower sizes, maintenance work, those types of things that that we are doing today or could do or have done in the recent past.
Anybody else? Great, thank you.